Dead by Daylight is a game that kind of prides itself on almost being a horror hall of fame of sorts, and as such has had licensed content based on plenty of iconic horror and horror adjacent media over its 8-year existence. And while there's definitely a few notable holdouts, a lot of iconic media is represented here. And that brings me onto the topic of this video, and a license that I go a little bit back and forth on how I feel about the idea of it being brought into the fog. Like it or not, it has been kind of the indie horror game franchise for the last decade now, with mountains of merch, a ton of games, books, a myriad of fan games that even branched out into its own fanverse, a movie with a sequel confirmed to be on the way in 2025, and has been a mainstay of the This Time For Sure cycle for at least a few years. I remember seeing people thinking that so many things in various teasers and announcements were for this. I remember when the Hellraiser chapter was being announced, and because of the date on the video, which happened to be a coincidence because Hellraiser came out in 1987, the same year of a certain incident, but as part of its 10th anniversary announcements, the confirmation was made official. In summer 2025, Five Nights at Freddy's will be entering the world of Dead by Daylight. And while I'm not a hardcore FNAF fan by any means, I'm much more of a casual observer of the series, I honestly was a bit unsure of having it in DBD, because I initially thought that tonally it might be a little bit out of place, and was also a bit unsure about how the gameplay of FNAF would logically carry through into the gameplay of DBD. But ultimately, I do think it's a good thing, and clearly there has to be a degree of confidence and trust with behaviour if Scott is willing to license out the IP and work with them. Scott has historically been quite protective of the FNAF IP, stating in his recent interview with Dorco that, quote, "I'm very careful with collaborations because I want to protect the brand. I want to make sure that Five Nights at Freddy's stays as Five Nights at Freddy's, and there are some games where even if I really enjoy the game, it just doesn't feel like a good match. It feels like a mismatch. The brand integrity is the most important thing for me, and keeping everything feeling like it belongs, and so that's really been my only hesitancy. I feel like I am branching out a little bit, I am a little bit more open to these things than maybe I was in the early years, but I'm still very careful about it, so we'll just see. We'll see how things go." End quote. Honestly, I really respect that. Personally, I would rather FNAF be something that carefully picks and chooses what it works with, in stark contrast to a company like Konami, who will kinda just shove Pyramid Head into anything that it can. As of the time of me making this video, we don't know the scale of the collaboration, we don't know if it's going to be a full chapter with a new killer, survivor, and map, or if it'll just be a paragraph with a new killer and some skins, or what. I'm personally currently leaning towards it being just a paragraph, but I do have a few ideas for a complete chapter, so I kinda just want to go through those. Now, I want to preface this by saying that the killer will 100% be Springtrap. At this point, he's arguably more of the face of the franchise than Freddy himself, and as such, I have quite a bit to say on this character and franchise being welcomed into the fog. Honestly, this video actually started out as a section in another video that I was planning to make, where I just talked about characters that I wanted to see in the game. First up is the map, and while Fazbear Frights from FNAF 3 is the most likely choice, because it's where Springtrap had his first appearance, and it's likely where his lore will say he was pulled into the realm, I think it would be really cool to have a map that takes and combines elements of the first 4 games into one map. It could be a really surreal map, like you could run out of the office from FNAF 2 and end up in the bedroom from 4, and the closet that Nightmare Foxy pops out of could now be a locker for the survivors to hide in. Maybe instead of breakable walls, there could be doors that can be closed, and the gen in the security office could have doors that you can tactically close to prevent the killer's approach from one side. But the killer can kick that door to make it open sooner, not that nurse players would need to worry or care about that much anyway. Or maybe the doors on the security office can stay closed for a certain amount of time, and then when they run out of power, the entire map darkens, and they're disabled for the remainder of the match. I did consider having vents on the map as an option for the survivors to go through as a means of traversal, but I quickly realised that there would need to be something to prevent them from just sitting in the vents and holding a match hostage, as most killers probably wouldn't really be able to do much about it. Xenomorph and Chucky would be fine, and I'm sure that there'd end up being a clip of someone hitting some insane trickster knife bounces with it, but generally it might be too abusable to be included. But the Dungeons and Dragons map had the passages, so it might not be entirely out of the question. It might require a few little tweaks, but I think we could make it work. As for Springtrap's perks, I had a couple of ideas. Note, some of these might be garbage, or they might be super busted. Balance is not my job. First up is Through the Monitor. If a survivor looks at you for more than 5 unbroken seconds outside of chase, they'll scream, revealing their location, and they'll get a static effect on screen. I don't know how this would work for people with epilepsy, so maybe we remove that part. And it will also give them the Oblivious status ailment for 30, 45, 60 seconds. When I originally wrote up the concept for this perk, it was just looking for 5 unbroken seconds in general, but I originally wrote this back in January, and since then the Unknown came out in February, and you need to look at the Unknown to get rid of the weakness part of its power, so I had to kinda shuffle things about just a little bit for it. I did have another version of this perk planned out, which was standing still while a survivor looks at you accumulates time. This time can be used to turn completely invisible for between 3 and 7 seconds, depending on how long they looked at you, disappearing and hiding the terror radius and red stain completely. Attacking or breaking a pallet will break this effect early. However, I quickly dropped this concept because I realised I was basically giving spirits power to every killer in the game, and while it might be funny to have a completely invisible Myers pop up and tombstone you once or twice, I realised that it would ultimately be infinitely more annoying than fun for the survivors. The second perk idea I had was simply called Jump Scare. If a survivor looks directly at you within 16, 12, or 8 meters depending on level, they will scream, be exposed, and give killer instinct for 5 seconds. I hadn't really planned on it, but now that I'm actually saying it out loud, I realised that that would be an amazing perk on Ghostface. The final perk idea I have for him is called I Always Come Back, with the effect that he'll gain Bloodlust 10, 20, 30% faster than usual. The Bloodlust effect towards each survivor would be maintained even if the chase ends or you break a pallet or something. You would lose 2 tiers of Bloodlust for a hit, and all 3 tiers for a hook. However, the Obsession wouldn't be able to lose tiers, but they would take significantly longer to gain Bloodlust. I was thinking 190, 80% longer, with the quote at the end of the perk being, "He will come back, he always does," a reference to the line's origin in the trailer for Five Nights at Freddy's 3. I could see this perk being an issue, partially because I imagine coding it would be a nightmare, not that I know anything about coding, and how it would work if you chased 2 survivors at once. I think it does have potential as a concept perk, but I think I may have slightly pushed it too far in one direction. Now this is where this maybe takes a bit of a weird turn, but it also has no bearing on anything because I know that this has absolutely 0% chance of happening. But if I know my FNAF and DBD lore correctly, admittedly my DBD lore is a bit better than my FNAF lore, the entity is stated to be basically an emotion vampire, feeding off the emotions of the people in the realm, both the killers and the survivors. I'm not sure if they're considered to be canon, but I think it's in the novels. William Afton was a man who seemed to pursue immortality because he had a constant fear of death. So while there's a 0% chance of this happening, because honestly it isn't justifiable on a moral level given his crimes, but from a lore perspective, I think William Afton could be a survivor. As a survivor, I imagine he would kind of be the anti-Dwight, or more like an evil cross between Dwight and Young Jin. Given his background in robotics, he would probably have some good gen perks, but he would also be the first person to throw someone else under the bus if it would save him. He's the guy who always lets you go to second stage on hook because he's doing a gen and refuses to move, and he's also the guy who immediately runs out the door when the gate is open, even if there's another survivor hooked right next to the door and you could get both of you out. He burns with the building again, and finally dies in Pizzeria Simulator, completes 50-20 mode in Ultimate Custom Night, and effectively survives his own personal hell, only to wake up at the campfire, unaware that he's entered a new one. A deadly game of cat and mouse, where he's always the powerless mouse having to run and hide, fearing for his life at every moment, and the entity would have a feast from this man. The bitter irony of it being that, in a sense, he did get the immortality that he always wanted, but it's an immortality of eternal suffering. As for who we could realistically actually add as a survivor, our options are really limited, which is part of why I think FNAF might end up as a paragraph. The most logical choice for a survivor would be William's son Michael Afton, and having them be taken during the fire at Fazbear Frights at the end of the third game. For lore purposes, that also gives a very simple and easy reason to make Fazbear Frights be the map, even if I do like the idea that I detailed earlier. Alternatively, you could have it be that they still get saved from the fire, but instead it's the one at the end of Pizzeria Simulator. But then we would be into Scrap Trap territory, and let's be real, no one really likes Scrap Trap, especially in comparison to Springtrap's iconic design. Now, this next bit is going to require me to go into the FNAF timeline a bit, and I know how much of an ungodly mess that entire discussion is, but please bear with me on this. The issue that this brings is quite simply that Michael doesn't really have an official design. We get a silhouette, but we never get a proper look at the guy in the games. The secret ending of Sister Location has a narration from Michael saying that he found her. This being in reference to Circus Baby, which was being possessed by the spirit of his sister Elizabeth, making Sister Location's title quite literal. And that ending ends with him saying that he's going to come and find his father, ending with Springtrap lurching into the frame. So I assume that Sister Location takes place not long before the events of FNAF 3, because Michael says that he should be dead, but he isn't, this being a result of him getting scooped and basically being used as a flesh mech by Ennard for a while. And I just don't really believe that as a basically decaying purple guy that he would be able to live a normal life or get and sustain a job, especially for years before FNAF 3 happens, which is why I think those games might not happen too far apart, and why Michael might not really work too well as a survivor if he's taken at the end of either of those games, because one way or another he's still kind of a decaying purple guy, which might weird out the other survivors even if he does mean well. Similarly, we also never get an official look at Mike Schmidt, Jeremy Fitzgerald, or Fritz Smith, but Mike and Fritz are likely just Michael going under different aliases, as he gets jobs at other locations owned and operated by Fazbear Entertainment. For other feasible survivors to represent the series, we would need to look to the Steel Wool era of the games, where I think, maybe obviously with some input and getting the okay from Scott, they could kind of do what they did for Yoichi when they did the Ringu chapter, and make a half-licensed, half-original version, and bring an older Gregory into the fog, and he could probably have Cassie as a legendary skin. Vanessa could also be an option, but I think she's much more likely to make it into the game as a Vanny. As is tradition for DBD trailers, poor Night Guard Dwight is probably going to be having a terrible time in the trailer. I do think that this chapter will probably bring a ton of skins into the game. Springtrap himself probably gets skins based on, at minimum, the 4 main classic animatronics, and maybe Golden Freddy, but he could also have a ton of alts based on their various different looks throughout the games. I feel like Vanny as a skin for Legion is basically a lock, although if she was revealed to actually be the killer for the chapter, I would find that hilarious just to see how people would react. Honestly, they could maybe even just have the classic 4 as Legion skins, kind of like how they each got a different colour of Robbie the Rabbit with the Silent Hill chapter. My personal guess would be Frank would be Freddy, Joey would be Bonnie, Julie would be Chica, and Susie would be Foxy. Honestly, even the original Spring Bonnie and Golden Freddy suits could work for Legion skins, since they're effectively just mascot costumes when they're not in the animatronic mode, and the entity would be able to replicate the original suit pretty easily to be able to keep Springtrap separate and make this a possible skin. This next one is my much more goofy, fun kind of idea, and that would be to have Nightmare Freddy, where Freddy takes the role of Tahosh, Chica is the jailer, Bonnie is the Carnifex, and Foxy is the assassin, with them all appearing the same way they did in FNAF 4. Nurse could get a skin based on Puppet or Nightmarion, although Nightmarion might also be a better fit with the Unknown. Maybe Spirit gets one based on Circus Baby or Ballora. Doctor or Hag could get Nightmare Fredbear, and I don't know how it would work for coding it and everything, but I would love to see the other Nightmare animatronics pop up as the hallucinations, or the Freddles could be Hag's traps. Blight could get some form of Foxy as a skin. It fits since they both run fast and the Hook could just replace his cane, although this could maybe cause a visibility issue about the killer's reach. Personally, I've been finding it annoying enough with the champagne bottle from Unknown's anniversary skin. Even twins could get a skin with Scrap Baby as Charlotte and Scrap Trap as Victor. I think that'd be a funny little one to have. And then Ened, Molten Freddy, or Tangle would obviously make for a great Dredge skin. Maybe its weapon could just be the scoop. I had this thought while editing and suddenly needed to include it. You know that game with a toy crocodile where you push down on its teeth and sometimes it'll snap closed? Yeah, I thought about that and now I want Monty to be a skin for Trapper. While it would obviously lean heavily onto the killer side for cosmetics, survivors wouldn't have to completely miss out. He already has the hat for it from when it was an Auric Cell purchase bonus, but I think Balloon Boy Dwight would be a great addition for a skin. Hopefully the propeller on the hat would actually move this time while he's running. Carrying on from that, you could also make JJ for Meg. Circus Baby could maybe work for Michaela. You could make Zor Sable, I think that could work. All of the survivors could maybe get the security uniform, and maybe all of the survivors could get the puppet's face as a mask. Maybe Michael or Gregory or whoever we make the survivor be can have a hand puppet of Bonbon or Helpy, similar to how Ash can have the Ashy Slashy puppet. I think they could get great charms out of Chica's Cupcake, Plush Trap, Trash and the Gang, Helpy, and a hamper of exotic butters. And this one's just for me, but if there's ever a tome released at a later time that includes lore for Springtrap, I want it to be narrated by Mr. Hippo. Or Phone Guy, either or. I'm leaning towards Mr. Hippo, but I would be very happy with either. A good few of these ideas are just for fun, and I don't think they realistically have any chance of making it into the game, especially the night one. But yeah, that's all the ideas I had for this. Obviously, everything here is just my thoughts, and if any of it actually makes it into the game, that's purely a coincidence. I'm definitely curious as to how it'll all turn out, and still a little bit conflicted as to whether it'll work both thematically and in terms of gameplay, but at this exact moment in time I'm cautiously optimistic about it, because as stated earlier, Scott wouldn't license out the brand if he didn't think it would fit. As I mentioned earlier, this was initially part of a larger video that I'd planned on making, but thought that this was getting a bit too big for just a section in the video, and honestly, given a bit of hindsight, I'm glad I made it its own separate thing. Mostly because I ended up fleshing this out a lot more than I thought I was going to, and also with the actual announcement of the chapter, I decided to focus on this and get it done sooner rather than later. But yeah, that's just about all from me. Don't worry, I'm not gonna randomly just drop a jump scare on you at the end of this video, but my final statement is that I personally can't wait to see what kind of monstrosity we're gonna get when Blight inevitably jumps Springtrap and gets him with the serum. But as always, feel free to leave a comment or click any of the buttons down below if you feel so inclined, and I'll hopefully see you all for whatever it is I'm doing next. Okay, thanks for watching, later!